Hello, I'm Steve Hawks, Senior Director for Wildfire at the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety.
And I'm Laura Blaul, Senior Wildfire Fellow with IBHS.
So Laura, let's talk about some of the requirements of the Wildfire Prepared Home program. How do I know what to do?
So on our website, wildfireprepared.org, we have a number of resources. And one of them is a technical guide that is really good to give to your architect or your builder that walks them through the how-to for each of the components of Wildfire Prepared Home. And we also have some other resources. We have a set of plan notes that can go on the plan that your architect draws up for you that will provide guidance throughout the process. And then a stamp, an IBHS logo that says, we are seeking designation. So please don't switch out any components during design or construction that would disqualify from achieving the designation of Wildfire Prepared Home Plus.
That sounds like really good advice to follow. So another question that we routinely get is, what should I do if I'm not in a fire hazard severity zone?
So I think the fires in LA showed that even if you're not in a zone, you can have significant wildfire exposure. One of the things with the maps and the fire hazard zones that were done by CAL FIRE is they were looking at wildland fuels and not urban fuels. And what we learned from a number of fires in urban conflagrations is those structural fuels can be just as damaging and even more so. So if you have any kind of exposure to a wildland area, you want to take a look at the Wildfire Prepared Home standard and consider rebuilding to that standard.
Yeah, because we've seen that those embers really fly long distances and can
Miles.
really go deep into a community and lead to ignitions that way.
Yes.
Yeah. So another question is, how do I make sure my architect or contractor builds the house correctly?
And that's, with change orders that come throughout processes and looking at different materials and maybe saying, oh, I'd rather have this siding, it looks better. You just want to keep going back to that standard and making sure that any substitution throughout the process will still qualify as meeting the element in the standard for that building component. So it's a constant recheck process and really talking to your architect and your builder to make sure that they're following the standard throughout, regardless of any substitutions that are made.
Okay. We hear a lot about ADUs and the desire to have an ADU on the property. So what are the requirements around ADUs, and what if, if it's only 5 feet from my property line, does that make a difference?
So an ADU, to qualify for designation as a Wildfire Prepared Home, it has to be 30 feet from your home. So you want to take a look at how you can position during the rebuild and make sure that you can get that 30-foot distance. If you can't, we still really encourage people to build both the ADU and the primary home to the Wildfire Prepared Home Plus standard. And you would be able to get a base designation for each, and then still have that peace of mind that it can withstand flames, embers, and radiant heat. The 5 foot to the property line is a common question that we get. My neighbor's ADU is within 10 feet of my home or 5 feet of my home. We are only looking at a parcel designation because you can't control what your neighbor does. And we're recognizing that in the designation process. So we're just looking at your lot when we're considering distances.
Okay, yeah. Where do I measure ADU distance from?
From the exterior wall. So that's another common question. Do I have to measure it from my eave overhang? So it's just from the exterior wall of your house to the exterior wall of the ADU, that distance, and try to get that as far apart as you can in 30 feet if at all possible.
Okay. Can I have vinyl window frames, and why no vinyl fence?
So you can have vinyl window frames, dual pane tempered in a vinyl window frame. The testing shows that it fares pretty well. Vinyl fencing is usually contiguous with fuels, other fuels that are against the fence line. A lot of people like plants or vines growing on their fence. And it is a combustible material, so it will melt and burn, and so we like to see non-combustible fencing rather than any vinyl.
Yeah, in particular that first 5 feet out
First
from the
5
house.
feet,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay. What qualifies as a non-combustible fence?
So it's usually masonry, brick, or one of the really common materials right now, because it's less expensive and there's more manufacturers that are making metal fencing, and you can get different coatings. It can look just like wood. It can be any color and any look that you like. So it's a sustainable material also. So it's pretty common in the rebuild process.
So if I only have 3 foot to my property line, can I get a certification still?
You may be able to. So we're looking for that 5 foot non-combustible zone away from your home. So if your neighbor, and so say you have, you each have 3 feet to your property line, that means you have 6 feet between you.
Mm-hmm.
If you both can work together to keep that non-combustible with a non-combustible fence between you or no fencing at all, in just a non-combustible zone, you can. But you really have to work with your neighbor, and that's common in wildfire scenarios, that it's a community problem. So you want to solve it together. And if you can get your neighbor to work with you and keep the plants out of that zone so that you both have 5 foot clear, you can get a designation.
That's good to know. So I have a 150-year-old oak tree on my property. Can I still get a certification with that?
So it depends. Oak trees can be pretty big. They're beautiful trees with large canopies. If you can trim and limit up so that it's not overhanging into your 5 foot zone, you can keep it. In fact, we encourage trees outside of your 5 foot zone. You just have to really look at the top of the canopy and make sure no part of that tree canopy is in your 5 foot zone.
Okay. So how does the defensible space requirements in the Wildfire Prepared Home program maybe differ from what my local jurisdiction requires?
They're going to be very similar, especially in California, because we do have some state law and standards that set the limitations for vegetation in your up to 100 feet from your home. And when we're talking about tree spacing, shrub spacing, laddering effects to make sure that the shrubs underneath the trees aren't too tall, when all of that is pretty similar for local jurisdictions, state requirements, and IBHS standards. The biggest difference is going to be that 5 foot zone 0. Not a lot of other fire department regulations and state regulations require it. And so you want to make sure you keep that clear and then follow all the FireWise guidance and guidance from your local fire agency.
Okay. If my home already passes defensible space inspection, why do I need another one kind of associated with the Wildfire Prepared Home designation?
Just as a double check, because home hardening on IBHS Wildfire Prepared Standard and your defensible space go hand in hand. You really need both for the maximum chance of survival and making sure that your home doesn't ignite in the first place. So it's just a double check to make sure that both are present before we provide the designation.
Okay. And does it only apply to new construction, or can I retrofit my house?
You can retrofit your house. So when you're doing a rebuild, it's pretty easy to get to a plus standard, and that's the maximum protection for flames, embers, and radiant heat. But a retrofit to our base standard will give you pretty good ember protection, which is the primary way that homes ignite in the first place. So you can get a designation for both. And so we really encourage, if you're in a neighborhood and there were 1 or 2 surviving homes and the rest are being reconstructed, that you encourage those neighbors to at least retrofit to base so that your whole neighborhood is protected.
Yeah, it sounds like a really important thing to do. So Laura, thank you so much for joining me and answering these questions about the requirements around the Wildfire Prepared Home program.
Thank you, Steve.